This video will be focusing on and analyzing two coins minted by the Holy Roman Emperor Justinian II. Justinian minted not one, but two distinctly different images of Christ on his coin. One of the images, which will later be identified as Type B, depicts Christ with scant woolly hair, while the other, which will be called Type A, has a broad face, and hair long and wavy. As one could presume, the black Hebrews scream blasphemy, proclaiming the second coin to be a modern forged by the white man. They promote only the first, so it can somewhat appear to coincide with their belief system. I will now read from a book entitled, The Numismatic Iconography of Justinian II, by James D. Brackenridge. Within the book, the author has combined literary and visual sources of the time of Justinian, enabling us to decipher both the coin's origins and meaning. Let us begin examining Justinian's second coin. Page 1. Justinian II was the first Byzantine emperor to place the image of Christ on his regular official coinage. When he took this step, furthermore, he used not one but two quite different representations of the physical appearance of Christ. The precedent thus created was ignored by his successors, however, and the Christ image disappeared again from the Byzantine coinage for a century and a half, while the Eastern Empire was torn by the iconoclastic controversy. Then, almost immediately upon the restoration of the images in the middle of the 9th century, one of Justinian II's two coin types of Christ was copied almost line for line by the die cutters of Michael III, and thereafter became the prototype of one of the Christ representations which became normal on imperial Byzantine coins from the 9th century on. End quote. The coin which you now see is that which was minted by Emperor Michael III. Closely resembling that of Justinian's coin, one need not think as to where the image's origins lie. Let us analyze Justinian's second coin. Page 58-59. It was just at this time that there originated a legend which has long intrigued historians of Christian art. In the time of the Archbishop Gennadios, who was Patriarch of Constantinople from 458 to 471, a certain painter made an icon, at the instigation of a pagan, portraying Christ in the likeness of Zeus. The painter's hand and arm withered in consequence of his blasphemous act, but he was healed miraculously through the intercession of Gennadios. The early versions of this legend do not amplify the words, in the likeness of Zeus, but when the miracle was recounted by John of Damascus, the famous 8th century iconophile described most explicitly his conception of a figure of Christ in the likeness of Zeus. The hair on the head was painted as dividing on either side, so that the eyes were not hidden. For in such manner, the Greeks painted their Zeus. Such a legend would not have arisen, obviously, had there not been some occasion when images of Christ were considered to have been derived from those of the pagan Zeus, and modern scholarship has certainly been able to show that more than one pagan deity provided the antecedents for the appearance of Christ in one or another of the likenesses known to the Christian Empire. With the general acceptance of the marble head of Zeus from Mylasa in Caria, now in Boston, as a good and accurate copy of the Phidian work, however, this has become possible. Viewed from full face, this head represents a striking parallel to the appearance of our type A head, both in its general proportions of one part in relation to another, and in the strongly marked parting of the hair which John Damascene so stressed. The model for our Christ type A, and before for the great apse mosaic of the Chrysotriclinium, must indeed have been the Phidian Zeus. This would have been completely sensible, in terms of the ideation of the 6th century, when paganism had been so thoroughly suppressed, at least at the intellectual level, that there needed be no longer any fear of contamination in borrowing from its imagery in this overt way. End quote. Justinian's coin of Christ is authentic, and is probably derived from the image of Zeus. This being said, refutes the claim that the first image of a white Christ appeared in the 14th century. From Michael III minting, and circulating throughout his empire, a depiction of Christ with wavy hair, and not curly, explains to us why today people perceive Christ as they do. It was not through conspiracy, but mere chance, for had Michael have minted Justinian's other coin of Christ, then I'm sure it would have become the dominant template. Let us now examine the coin, where Christ is seen with curly hair. Page 59, 60. Our type B of Christ portrait is characterized by the same attitude, garments, attributes and legend as type A, but its facial features are wholly different. The head is longer, the face thin and triangular, the hair and beard scant and very curly. Our first source of information on this type is in the same passage in the ecclesiastical history of Theodoros Anagnists, where we found the story of the painter healed by the patriarch Gennadios. After concluding his story of the miracle by the benevolent archbishop, Theodoros goes on to say, but one of the historians says, that the other type of the Savior, the woolly and short-haired, is taken for granted as the more truthful. This description would seem to fit, above all extant early portraits of Christ, the one used on the coins of Justinian II. We learn more about this figure when Theophanes repeats the story of Gennadios, basing his remarks upon Theodoros, but adding some new information. But certain of the historians say that the woolly and short-haired type is the more familiar in the time of the Savior. These remarks are repeated by such later writers as Nicephorus Callistos, and were transmitted to the 17th century Athos painter's manual, which includes in its description of the appearance of Christ from the original and earliest sources, mention of the head frizzy-haired tending to blonde, the beard being black. So we still seem to be dealing with our type B. And since the type described is scarcely that of the customary Christ figure of late Byzantine times, the references to the antiquity of the image must be given great stress in considering the significance of the passage. All these terms applied to this image of Christ, such as, more truthful, more familiar in the time of the Savior, as it has been transmitted by those who first saw it, point in the same direction as the anatomical characteristics of the portrait type itself would indicate, toward an origin in the Syrian and Palestinian sphere of early Christianity. And they also suggest strongly a link with the most important group of early portrait icons of Christ, the acheiropoietai, the images not painted by human hands, but preserving the actual living appearance of Christ by miraculous means. End quote. I find it important to note here that the image of Christ with woolly hair was not inspired from any description given in the Bible. Had it have been so, then the early writers would have recorded it, and the wavy-haired image would not have become so widely accepted. Page 61. We have a description of one such portrait of Christ said to have been painted during his lifetime, which was erected in the praetorium of the palace of Pontius Pilate, the later church of S. Sophia at Jerusalem. The 6th century pilgrim Anthony of Placentia described the picture, and significantly enough, describes the head as having capillos subanlatos. So it would seem that here we are also dealing with a version of the same curly-haired portrait of Christ as in the previous cases. And the same is true of the famous letter purporting to have been written by John of Damascus to the Emperor Theophilus, which states that Constantine the Great had the figure of Christ put on paintings and mosaics, in the Holy Land, and represented the Savior, as the old authorities had described, with eyebrows that joined, fine eyes, a long nose, frizzy hair, a black beard, flesh tones like his mother's, the color of wheat. Although its authorship may be in doubt, there can be no question that this letter was a product of the iconoclastic controversy, or that the description is of our type B. End quote. Let me repeat the description given of Christ. Long nose, frizzy hair, black beard, flesh tones like his mother's, the color of wheat. The color swarthy? The color of wheat. The color of black? The color of wheat. The color of dark brown? The color of wheat. It's undeniable that both coins circulated by Justinian II are both authentic, with one having more weight for being a closer resemblance to Christ than the other, which is thought to be a pagan offshoot of Zeus. But if we are to look at the coin of Christ with woolly hair, and proclaim it black, just because of its woolly hair, is nonsensical. We possess written primary sources, which describe the exact same coin we view today, which clearly describe his flesh tone like that of wheat, not black. Here is an image of Lucius Aurelius Verus, the adopted half-brother, and co-emperor of Marcus Aurelius. This man has woolly hair, but are we then to pronounce him black? No, because the features, specifically the nose and lips, refute this theory, as is the case for the woolly-haired image of Christ, a long nose, and small lips. Page 61. In the famous Rabula Gospels in the Laurentian Library in Florence, whose colophon not only dates the manuscript very precisely to 586 AD, but locates its place of composition in exactly the region of Syriaca, we find in the dedication miniature a figure of Christ whose head, with its thick curly hair, short black beard, and triangular face, is remarkably close to our type B. End quote. Now showing is the same image of Christ from the Rabula Gospels. The similarities to that of Justinian's coin are easily recognizable. Let me now read a description of Christ's Mother Mary. The following was written by Nikephoros Kallistos, who became the last of the Byzantine Greek ecclesiastical historians. He flourished around 1320. Her character, appearance, and stature were, according to Epiphanius, as follows. She was honorable and serious in all matters, speaking little and only when necessary. She was a ready listener and very approachable, showing dignity and respect to everyone. She was of moderate height, although there are those who say that she was somewhat taller than average. In the presence of all she had a dignified forthrightness, without resorting to scornful laughter, agitation, or above all irascibility. Her complexion was the color of wheat, with blonde hair, keen eyes, and pupils yellowish-brown and almost olive-colored. Her eyebrows were arched and becomingly black, her nose somewhat long, her lips full and replete with sweet speech. Her face was neither round nor sharp, but somewhat long, and her hands and fingers were also rather long. She was completely lacking in haughtiness. She was sincere, certainly did not feign facial expressions, and conveyed no sense of frailty, but cultivated humility. She was content with the clothes she usually wore, which were of natural, undyed color, which is what her holy headdress shows even today. In brief, in all respects she was divinely endowed with abundant grace. Her age, however, remained as I said before. Page 94, 95, Book 2, Chapter 6, Sacred Painting, by Federico Borromeo. I feel that through the readings of these works, it's safe to say that the coin on which Christ is depicted with woolly hair is not black. Analyzing the literature in the time of Justinian makes it quite clear that they believed Christ to be a man of weak complexion. And if this is so, then the idea of Christ being black is nothing but a fairy tale.